Welcome to the HC Commodities Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the commodities sector and the people within it. I'm your host, Paul Chapman. This podcast is produced by HC Group, a global search firm dedicated to the commodities sector. Today we're talking AI. What is it? How is it transforming the world? Which sectors are going to benefit from it? And what is the opportunity and challenges and risks for the energy and commodities sector? Our guest is Dr. Seth Dobrin. Seth is CEO of the advisory firm Qantm AI, as well as co-founder and general partner at One Infinity, a responsible investment firm focused on the AI sector, with Silicon Sound Studios embedded in it, which is a venture fund. Seth's career spans commodities and technology. Seth was global head of digital for Monsanto, deploying AI technology there, and then went on to become head of AI for IBM, before launching his current ventures. We also have an upcoming HC Commodities live podcast event in Houston on September 19th, focused on US natural gas trading in a global market. We've got a fantastic panel. The event is free but in-person only and requires an RSVP. Spaces are limited in number and limited for industry participants. After the panel, we've got cocktails and drinks, so it's a great networking opportunity for those people in Houston. So hopefully see you there. As always, you can really support the show by leaving us a positive review on the platform you're listening on, particularly Apple. If you scroll down on the main show page, you'll see write a review. If you can click 5 stars and write a short review, it would really support us. And as always, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Seth, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So before we dig into AI and its entwining story and the opportunities for the commodities sector, I think in order to give people a sense of why you're able to have this discussion, can you give us your career background, how actually it has intertwined these two worlds?
Yeah, so it's my career's a little bit unique in that I started in AI space in the mid '90s during my PhD, which is actually in human genetics. Human genetics and astrophysics were actually the two first places where AI and what we used to call big data were actually applied outside of the mathematical and computer sciences world back in the early mid and late 90s. And then from there, I had been applying these tools throughout my career in the life sciences, in startups and research institutions. And then in 2006, I joined Monsanto. And so that's when I kind of got into the agricultural realm and really started touching the field of commodities. During my time at Monsanto, I combined my molecular expertise as well as my AI expertise to transform how agricultural seed, so how seed development was done, and started applying both genetics and machine learning or AI to fundamentally change the product development pipeline to create more yield, so greater yield in these products that growers around the world use. For by the time I left that role 5 years later, so in 2011, from where when I joined in 2006, no products in Monsanto were going through that, to by the time I left, all 22 products that Monsanto sold, from corn to cucumber to onions, were going through this process of both molecular markers and machine learning to optimize and create better products with higher yield and more products, which ultimately led to more reliable commodity production, right? So they could resist disease, they could increase yield, they could resist drought. Plus, we also got to the point where we could optimize planting of these so that they were optimized for different field conditions, different weather conditions. We even got pretty good at predicting macro trends in weather, so we could recommend different seeds for different parts of the world, depending on what we thought the weather was going to be. So really being able to stabilize or help farmers get, be more stabilized for their prices in the commodity market.
Yeah, and then you went on to run AI at IBM, but we met at the FT conference this year in Lausanne, and part of the scope of this podcast, I think, is for us to get a little bit further in terms of our knowledge of what AI is and what it isn't, but also actually, you've seen many sectors being involved in this, and there's huge, and just sort of give us some sense of how far those sectors are ahead of the commodities sector in some way. But you did mention when we had that brief chat that actually you had looked even in your time at Monsanto in trading, and even then it had struck you how unsophisticated in some ways the trading setup was. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, that is a fair comment. So we did look at trading. We did actually, start a pilot project at Monsanto to look at, ultimately we started looking at, this was a time at the beginning of, digital transformation back in 2015, 2016, when we started looking at this, started looking at, our farmers, our customers, which were growers, don't actually want to buy seed. They don't actually care about inputs. What they care about is yield and profitability, right? Who knew, right? And so we started looking at, what can we understand the commodities market a little better so that we could start working with them to sell these things. And it turns out, like you said, that, the commodities market really didn't have a good grasp on how to use data. Believe it, that was really surprising. How to use even, good basic machine learning models back then. And so, interestingly, at the same time was when you saw a lot of quants, starting to do high frequency trading and things like that, and other financial markets. But it seemed like, and that's what we expected in the commodities market, that's not what we were seeing. I get that it's a little more complicated in commodities and that you have much more extended markets, right? In agriculture, you have farm gate, you have a lot of intermediaries that are very private companies like Cargill and others. So it's a little more complicated, but you have this whole financial supply chain and physical supply chain that's very disconnected. There's a lot of intermediaries, and so there's not a lot of good information that flows to be able to do a lot of AI, if you will. And that was very challenging for us, and I think is still challenging in the commodities market today, which I think leads this market to be very behind compared to most other fields, and even makes it difficult for them to catch up.
Yeah, and some of it's the nature of the expense that I guess we'll come on to. And part of that is that if you are one of those very large companies, you actually have that data. And that gives you a huge competitive advantage potentially over the next 10 years if you can maximize the return and opportunity around that using these latest tools. Let's turn to those tools. How do we define AI? What's the sort of the definitions we should look out for to understand whether something truly is AI? What's the spectrums of, can you help set us up there? I know it's quite prosaic, but I think it would help me.
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? I get asked that question all the time. I think, AI to a certain extent is in the eyes of the explainer. And if you're talking to a salesperson, pretty much any software is AI today. A lot of regulators look at AI as anything that's automated, any automated process, including could be rules. So if you look at some of the regulations around employment, pretty much anything that's rules based is AI as well. So even does this person have a certain degree? That's considered AI under those regulations. But how do I define AI? So let's talk about what AI is and what it stems from. So AI is statistics, right? So if we look back to the 1950s when AI was developed, it's statistical models, and statistical models are probabilistic. The difference between what people have been using, in statistics and machine learning, which is the basis for AI, is that around 2011, 2012, when cloud technology really started taking off and we started getting into this realm of what we used to call big data, is that two things happened. One is we started getting access to a lot of data, and two was we started getting access to a lot of cheap compute, which allowed us to take these statistical models, these static models, and the same exact math we were able to retrain over and over again. And so we were able to take these static models and allow them to be retrained over and over again. And so machine learning at its core is statistics. It's the same math that we can just retrain over and over again, and it continuously learns. And so that's machine learning, which is the basis of AI. And if you were to ask most business users, they would call that AI, what we think of as machine learning. So predictive or prescriptive analytics is machine learning. or is AI. If you were to ask, a more technical person, AI would be something is something called deep learning. And deep learning is a type of machine learning. And these are typically net new math. So these are not traditional traditional statistical models, but they're still built off of the same type of math. They're still probabilistic, just like statistics is. And so, these are neural networks, things like that. When you hear about black box models, typically they're talking about deep learning models. So these are more close to what we think about as AI. Traditional machine learning models, so built off of statistical models, those are relatively explainable. Deep learning models are not. And then around 2017, 2016, we started developing a new type of deep learning model that's called a foundation model. And foundation models are essentially very large, pre-trained deep learning models. And these models are the basis of what we think of today as generative AI. And so generative AI is a type of foundation model. So it's a pre-trained deep learning model that generates something. In the case of ChatGPT, it generates language. And language can be a lot of things can be described as language. Like most people know, there's code. Code is a language, genetics is a language, speech, text. There's all sorts of things that can be represented as a language. And so AI I define AI as kind of what I just described, all the way back to statistical descriptions, anything above statistical descriptions of things. So machine learning, deep learning, foundation models, generative AI, image models, language models, things like that. That's really AI. A long explanation for your question, but I think it provides a lot of context.
And is the sense that we're still very much at the nascent stage of this? In other words, the foundation models of today could be, sort of seen as completely obsolete in 2 years' time. Like, where are we sort of at in this, or is now about application of foundation models, if I'm using the right terminology?
So I think the foundation models of today, they're called transformer models. So they're based off of an architecture called transformer architecture. And, what OpenAI has developed in their GPT, which stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer Model, so ChatGPT or GPT, and GPT-4o is a type of transformer model. Anthropic's Claude is the same type of model. So all of the models you're hearing about for language are all that same kind of architecture. I think we're getting to the limit of what they're capable of. In fact, to a certain extent, we've already exceeded the limit of what they're really capable of, which is what causes some of the problems that exist with them. And so, we're going to see new types of math developed soon. So to answer your question is we're already coming to the point where we need new math or new types of architectures, which is what we refer to the math as when we talk about AI as architectures. So if you hear someone say architecture and algorithm, they're talking about the same thing. It's just the architecture is the implementation of the algorithm. And so we need new architectures to move forward, really.
Yeah. And is the emphasis, the R&D, going into those new architectures at the moment?
So I think if you look at what people really need to do, so these very large models are interesting, they're cool, and they have a purpose. They're very good at conversing, right? They're very good at interacting in language. You can have a great conversation with them. If I was still at Monsanto or at IBM, would I implement them to do anything besides have a conversation to solve a problem in my business? Absolutely not. What I would do is I would take the same technology today, or maybe work with a startup, and maybe I'm biased because I have a venture firm, and based on today's architecture, go back to the original roots of what this architecture was built for, which was small models. So the original architecture came out of Google research, and it was designed for language translation. And the novel aspect of it was able to translate language with context. Previous language models were unable to maintain context. And so this was the uniqueness of it, which is why Google Translate works better than anything else for a while, is because it had context. And so it was a very small task. It was language translation. And so were I in the commodities market, would I use Anthropic or Google's or OpenAI's model or Meta's model to solve a problem for my organization. No, what I would do is I would build a small model that's focused either on the commodities market or even on my business that's trained on that data to solve that problem. And then I'd probably use one of these larger models so my employees, customers, whomever could interact with the results of that model or even with that model. And so I think that's what we're going to start seeing in the future. And then we're also going to start seeing collections of these small models do things. That's called agentic AI. So I think that's where we're already starting to see that's where it's going. And in fact, if you look at performance of some of these small models on those tasks, they tend to perform as well or outperform these bigger models on those specific tasks.
Because part of this is, and me as a business leader as well, right? Is there's a lot of pressure to deploy AI. What are you doing with AI? All this kind of stuff, and some of it is trying to understand what we mean by even just those basic questions, but also I guess given obviously you're sort of on the tools and the ventures side about but what are the attributes of the sectors or types of companies that mean that they can really take advantage of this stuff? What sort of, if you could say we see this sector really thriving using this stuff because it has a heavy R&D focus, or it's incredibly data intensive, or whatever it might be. Is there any way you can sort of say these are the types of businesses that really should be looking at this?
Yeah, so I don't think it's business focused. And so if you let's look at my advisory firm. So it's not really a business. So every industry, every business can apply AI or generative AI. There's applications across every business. There's lots of horizontal applications that go across every business that are great situations for AI. Human resources, there's great applications for AI. Cybersecurity, supply chain. If you get into heavy equipment manufacturing, manufacturing, safety. Those are all things that go across multiple or every industry, right? So those are all great places to apply AI. And then even if you get into specific, certain specific industries or legal is another great place with generative AI where you can start applying it. Marketing's another one. So those are all, every company has some of those. A lot of companies have others, or a lot of industries have others. And then when you get into specific industries, there's probably niche things within each, or things that are niche to that industry where there's probably applications of AI. And then into each company, depending on what the company's objectives are, there's probably niche things. And so when a company calls me up with my Qantm AI, my advisory firm hat, and they say, hey, I want to talk to you about using generative AI, I say, sure, I'll help you. And then when I show up, the first thing I say is you're asking completely the wrong question. The right question is not, how do I use generative AI? The right question is, what's my business strategy? How can technology help me support or accelerate my business strategy? Inevitably, data, AI, and generative AI will be part of that solution, but you have to start with that business strategy. Otherwise, it may not add value. Right? If you're a publicly owned company, you've made commitments to the street. You need to make sure that if you're investing in AI, it's supporting those commitments. If you're a PE-backed firm, your goal is to no longer, and the PE firm is for you to no longer be owned by that PE firm, both of you. Are you doing what you need to do to get exited from that PE firm? If you're a private company, you obviously have metrics and goals that you've committed to. You need to make sure that you're aligning with the objectives that you've committed to your owners, whoever they are. And if you start with, I want to use generative AI, what's my generative AI strategy? You're not going to get there. And I often make the analogy to, 10, 15 years ago, everyone was trying to develop a mobile strategy. Do you hear anyone talking about a mobile strategy today?
Well, a blockchain strategy.
Or a blockchain strategy. Or blockchain's different, right? Not many companies are using blockchain anymore. So that's a little bit different, right? That was kind of a people were overemphasizing the importance of blockchain, right? Blockchain was a technology looking for a solution that didn't exist, right? I think AI is more akin to mobile or cloud, right? There is no mobile strategy anymore. Mobile is part of your strategy, right? Your business strategy. I think AI needs to be the same thing. There is no AI strategy. It's what's your business strategy and how does AI support it? Much like what's your business strategy? How does mobile support your business strategy?
So yeah, if you're Walmart, you're focused on cost and convenience, and obviously that huge logistics operation could presumably be AI could benefit that, right?
And Walmart is fantastic at that, right? Walmart does not implement AI if it's not aligned to their business strategy, and they're very, very good at implementing AI and at supporting their and accelerating their business strategy.
Yeah, and likewise, you could probably imagine that Porsche start using it on their engines or whatever it might be, or for HC Group, it's customer satisfaction, around the actual work that we do, right? And you can really lean into that and how to get better shortlists and so forth. When you spoke about those horizontals, legal, HR, marketing, what is it about those horizontals that lend themselves? What are their attributes that lend themselves to this kind of application? And I really do get the point. I think it's a good one about mobile is now a sine qua non of business, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And AI is probably going to be good the same way. In fact, we'll probably stop calling it AI. It's just computing technology, right? But what are those, of those horizontals? What are the sort of common attributes? What is it that enables you to start using these technologies?
Yeah. So, I think legal is relatively new with generative AI, right? And so, I think there's a lot of domains today that if you were to look back 18 months ago to 24 months ago would not have been ripe for AI. Legal's one of those. And so, there's a lot of routine tasks that occur that are very textually based. And so, for instance, how do we summarize a contract, or how do we pull out an important clause in a contract, or how do we compare multiple contracts, or how do we understand and summarize a regulation? Those are all things that are ideal for generative AI that can augment what a human does. And there are lots of companies out there, lots of startups out there that are starting to do that. There's companies like Robin AI, like IUAP, like Casetext. Casetext was recently bought by, or not so recently, a year ago, bought by Reuters. And so there's lots of companies out there that are already impacting the legal field. And so think of anything that's got a routine task that involves summarization, comparison, understanding of text or language.
Anything that the exams involve a lot of memorization.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
But to the same extent, right? The medical field involves a lot of memorization, but you're not going to have generative AI replacing a doctor. But you may have generative AI augmenting or replacing transcription, right? Medical transcription. You will probably start seeing generative AI providing summaries to your physician before she shows up in the office to meet with you, so they can provide better care to you.
But is that
right?
Is the reason why you're not going to replace a doctor simply the human behavioral reaction to that swap?
Yeah, absolutely. And generative AI is not going to replace your attorney either.
No.
Right? But I think there's opportunity for generative AI to help. And we're getting way off commodities.
Yeah, sorry,
here,
but
right?
it's definitely lower
But
cost.
I think there's plenty of opportunity for generative AI to provide services to underserved markets in like the legal field where they couldn't before, right? So you have lots of, a lot of people, especially in the U.S., who don't get good, and other parts of the world, who don't get good legal representation from public defenders. And it's not because the public defenders are bad attorneys. It's because they're overworked, right? For the most part. And so if generative AI can help them provide better counsel to their clients, these people who are underserved in the US, they tend to be Black and brown communities, can get better legal care. That's fantastic, right? And it's not going to displace these public defenders. It's going to help them serve more people who are in need of legal help.
Yeah, no.
Right. And so Anyway, we're way off topic.
So let's take. I think it's kind of important. There's a bit of world building, and also I think it's just fascinating to have,
And actually, it does help the commodities market, right? Because if you have more people that can afford to buy, I mean, it does help. Things like that are tangential, right? Help the commodities market because the more it helps increase GDP, the more people that are able to increase and participate in the economy. So things like that do help things like the commodities market.
The energy and resources sector is experiencing unprecedented change. To help companies navigate this world and capture its opportunities, HC Group launched Qantm Insights in 2023. Qantm has rapidly become the leading global expert network dedicated to energy and resources. Qantm Insights leverages HC Group's 20 years of connections and dedication to the sector to give clients the expertise they need to take decisions fast. Connect with Qantm's experts for anything from a 1-hour insights call to a longer-term consulting project at qantminsights.com.
So if you think about AI, I'm just thinking back to the panel you were on. There's two sort of large buckets, right? That in terms of applications, and correct me if I'm wrong here. One is obviously lowering costs, which in the commodities world, it is all of your product has no brand value. It's simply about who can get it there the cheapest and the fastest, and so on, and sometimes reliably. And the other side is obviously making better decisions. And if you put it in the context of what is your strategy, you've obviously got the physical players, refiners, producers, and this is already going on already. Actually, I think surprisingly these companies are more at the vanguard of some of this stuff, where they're looking at their strategies to make sure the world continues to produce, right? The rig works, the refinery is up and running, and
the super majors have been using machine learning and AI and decision, and operations research for decades.
Yeah, exactly. When would my refinery or rig potentially? When will that valve fail? And that's incredibly important and powerful information that seems like it's being unlocked. On the commodity trading side, I would imagine that most of the strategies are simply we want to have the best platform for our exceptional people to make the most money for the business, in trading. And part of being the best platform is having the lowest costs, but also actually having the data and the insight and the information. And historically, that role has been fulfilled by humans, fundamental analysts, quant analysts, and so forth. And a lot of the strategy of these trading houses has been to acquire assets that give them information, that is proprietary, and therefore gives them an edge in trading.
Yeah, I would be careful though about. So I think you need to look at the ROI, right? So I would be careful about on certain tasks or certain activities, you need to look at the ROI and not necessarily focus on lowering costs, because there may be some activities where you're going to need to invest a lot of money, but the value, and I think trading is one of those. The value to getting more information to make better decisions and faster decisions, which in commodities, the faster decision, I imagine, could be very, very valuable, could lead to a greater ROI. And so you need to look at, what's the ROI? What does speed mean to you? Because the faster you do things, the more it tends to cost. And so I think you need to look at, the total ROI, the total cost of ownership, and things like that, instead of individual costs of things. And that gets back to the strategy, is when you're looking at the strategy, you can examine those things instead of looking at them piecemeal.
I guess weaving into the cost. So the transformation of all of this data and its, from its various sources, from its unstructured data, whatever the right phrase might be, but from contracts, from brokers and all this, turning that into usable information. I mean, this is also not a small implementation, right? This is quite a hefty lift and shift to actually get an answer back, other than when it's cold, gas prices go up type thing.
Well, with these newer technologies, they're ideal for unstructured data. And you need to make sure you're combining the structured with the unstructured data. And these new generative AI technologies are designed for unstructured data. And so I think it's much easier nowadays to incorporate unstructured data than it ever has been. And so that's one of the, big transformations that, generative AI and foundation models in general have enabled.
just help me understand, what does that look like? So how quickly can you say, okay, just feed all that, just whatever form it's in, feed all this data into a foundation model, and we'll see what how big a lift is it to say, actually, we really want to start looking at this because it aligns with our strategy. We have information other people don't have, and I'm being quite prosaic, I know, and we feel that we could start getting information from this that would help us make faster decisions.
So, I've seen companies do this in 3 to 6 months. If you have the information, it can happen very quickly. It's having the information, having the data.
So the second part of this is kind of like what's happened in the commodities world is quite a stable, knowable, predictable world a decade ago. Ever increasing, arguably, free trade, or at least stable free trade, very few events. And we saw that in commodity prices were generally lower and less volatile, to today, where you've got extraordinary sort of volatility in events, geopolitical, deglobalization going on. How AI is trained on on historical data. How does that fit in with you being able to predict? How does that affect the probabilities in these models?
Yeah, I think that's in something like in anything that involves human behavior, I think that's always a challenge. In anything, we used to be able to rely on the environment to be rather stable. That's not very stable either. Although the farmer's almanac still remains somehow to be reliable. Relatively reliable. I don't know. For us, yeah. I don't know how that's possible. But I think that's going to be a challenge. We're seeing more disease pop up in agriculture. I think we're seeing more interruptions in supply chains because of geopolitical reasons, as you mentioned. And so AI is not good at predicting outliers such as that at this point. I think we'll get to AGI soon, which is, when AI gets to human intelligence soon. I think in the next decade or two. I think shortly after that, we'll get to superintelligence, which is where AI is smarter than humans. That's a little bit scary if we don't have the right guardrails around it. But I think at that point, that type of AI system that's smarter than humans will be able to, get its head around some of these things, predicting human behavior. But, today, even, in the stock market where AI has been used for a long time, it's not good at predicting human behavior. But the other thing you've seen a few times is AI actually causes changes in human behavior, right? AI trading actually impacts the trading markets. And so
trends are amplified and extended, right?
And extended or sometimes caused, right? We've seen AI cause, the New York Stock Exchange get shut down because AI went off and started doing trades for some reason, for some unknown reason, that caused stock prices to rise unexpectedly or plummet unexpectedly. And they had to shut down the exchange because they had to get them under control.
Yeah. And actually, that's an interesting point as well about even you now need to be, if you're in the trading world, thinking about what you absolutely need to have an intelligence on what the AI trades are doing, what the CTAs are doing, right? Without that, you're missing a large chunk of what's driving price. Just while we've got you, where are you seeing in the commodities sector? What are you seeing, and where do how rapid is I don't know whether it's a revolution or sort of this implementation is happening? What sectors are, what sort of segments within the commodities sector are really pushing on this? What are you just seeing out there?
Yeah, so I think the energy sector is pushing really hard, right? So I think, in the energy sector, obviously you have fossil fuel and you have renewables. A lot of the fossil fuel players are dabbling or playing in both, right? You're seeing, the big super majors doing both, so trying to get as much as they can out of the current fossil fuels while they're building up different renewable programs. And so there's a lot of AI going into that. So, if you look at the Guyana oil fields, there's a tremendous AI that went into all the companies that are working those fields right now, in terms of identifying those fields in the first place, in terms of figuring out where they're going to drop wells, how much oil they think they can get out of those wells. So there was a tremendous amount of AI that all those companies that are in there and all the the providers that work with those companies have used. Interestingly, there was also, and this is something the commodities market needs to think about, there was a standardization of the data platform that happened at the same time. So the underlying upstream data platform was standardized under something called OSDU, where, because the oil and the upstream, there's a whole lot of data movement between all the different oil companies and all the different countries that requires transfer of data that used to be incredibly painful, that wasn't conducive to doing AI. That happened at the same time, which really enabled a lot of this AI to happen in Guyana. And you're seeing that happen in other parts of the world as they're applying AI to these different energy sectors. There's also a lot of AI being applied to trading in fossil fuel, and you're also seeing AI applied in green energy, so in renewable energies. When you look at maintenance of equipment, so specifically in wind, it's very expensive, very time consuming. How do they predict when a turbine's going to go down, or when to turn them on, when to turn them off? What equipment's going to be needed to replace or to repair a turbine, because they're typically in remote areas and they don't want to send people out there to service them and not have the right equipment. But at the same time, they don't want to send them out with every piece of, equipment they need to possibly replace all the wind turbines in the area, because they need multiple semi trucks to bring all this stuff out there, right? And so, how do they use AI to maintain and service equipment, and prioritize servicing equipment, and understand what the energy grid requirements are going to be, so that they can make sure the renewable energy resources are going to be available for demands on the grid. So you have AI being used in that kind of sector. This is going to get even more important.
Which is going to accelerate the energy transition, right? But if you have that demand, that there's the intermittent nature of renewables. It's much more complex balancing the grid. You're going to start introducing much more sort of demand side management.
Well, it could help slow the transition, right? So it could help to your point, it could help stabilize how renewables impacted, so that you maintain the flow of fossil fuels, so that we have that as a backup for longer periods of time, because that's obviously more reliable, right? So natural gas, petrol, oil is more reliable because you can always turn it on. You can't always turn on the sun. You can't always turn on the wind. You can't always turn on the water. So, if we can extend the life of that and not use it all the time, it's better for the environment. That's a good day. And if we can use AI to help us do that, and we can, that's fantastic. And that helps extend the transition. And maybe at some point we stop needing oil, even if there's oil left in the world, right? And the Middle East has committed to stop pumping oil out of the ground by 2050.
AI also is going to enable a different suite of participants, presumably, to also get into these markets, right? If there is sufficient data available publicly or purchasable, we could see, and we already are, right, in terms of the hedge funds coming in, other CTAs and so forth. But presumably, it democratizes in some ways as well the ability for us, to look at our own legal case, but also to participate in different markets as well, without having necessarily to acquire all these assets. Is that when you look into the future, how does it change it?
I think even more so than you think. One of the things that generative AI is very good at is synthetic data, generating synthetic data that represents the real world. And the biggest barrier to entry for most companies is not having the data. And so if you can accurately and cheaply generate data to represent an industry or a use case, you can now enter that market and disintermediate a big player that had a very strong foothold that that was protected by having significant IP that was shored up by data. And so I think, every industry, every company is at risk, even if they don't think so. And you're seeing more and more of that across almost every industry today.
Yeah, fascinating. And does that mean, in some senses, that whereas diversification usually diluted shareholder value because you weren't the strategy wasn't just very clear and focused, actually, companies, I'm making this up, companies like Amazon or something, who have such a broad sweep across our lives, they've just got tremendous potential in the future about deploying these technologies and insight that they can really thrive from. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think diversification at the same time puts a lot of current companies at risk, right? So there's going to be companies that are going to come in and displace them. I think we'll see a lot of global Fortune 500 companies that exist today may not exist and probably won't exist in 10 years. Either they'll drop out of the Fortune 500 company, they'll go out of business, they'll get acquired, and that's going to be driven by all these new technologies. They'll be displaced by companies that may not even exist today. And, they're going to have their Kodak moment or their Blockbuster Videos moment. For those of you outside the US, right? I mean, Blockbuster Video refused to innovate and they got displaced by Netflix.
And Kodak invented the digital camera.
Right. So. Kodak invented the digital camera and said no one's ever going to want to use a digital camera.
But famously because it was run by film guys, chemists.
Right.
Right.
And then you had Samsung and Apple come in and basically almost ran Kodak out of business.
Yeah, I had to explain to my youngest that his granddad's camera was a camera, not a camera without a phone. Like, why does granddad's phone not have a phone?
But they owned almost all the IP for digital cameras.
Yeah.
They just refused to implement it.
Yeah, and I do certainly have faith in the commodities sector, which is runs on razor thin margins, runs on being the fastest, smartest, and so forth to respond. Couple more questions. One would be a large story at the moment being promulgated out there is power consumption is going to go exponential because of data centers and AI using an order of magnitude more in a query than your historical search technology, right? Just using these simple mathematical models. Is that a fair reflection of what we're going to see or not?
So I think, we've been running out of oil for the last 50 years and we still have oil left. And so I think, we've not run out of oil because we've developed new technologies to get more oil, to use oil more efficiently. We're going to see the same thing with this, right? We're seeing new chips being developed. We're seeing new optimizations of the math. In fact, with our firm, we're seeing, some of the companies, we haven't closed our fund yet, but we have companies in our pipeline that, the data centers that run entirely on green energy, new chip technologies that run order of magnitude to multiple orders of magnitude faster than current GPU technologies. And so, distributed GPU systems that will, virtual GPU systems where you can basically select GPUs that only run on green technology. And so my suspicion is that will not happen, just like we still have oil, even though we've been saying we're going to run out of oil in 10 years for the last 50 years. And so I don't think it's a concern and we need to pay attention to it. And it's also got to come down to, part of the strategy when you're defining, what your business strategy is, how you're going to use AI. It's also what type of latency can I afford, right? Do I really need my language model to respond within a millisecond, or can I wait? Do I really care if I get a response in a half a second? If I can take a half a second, well, I can deploy this generative AI system in the Nordics, where in the wintertime, it could actually be carbon negative because they're heating the towns around them and the buildings they're in with the heat that's generated. And they're run completely on renewables, right? You have Canada, you have the Nordics where this all happens. So, let's architect these systems and design these systems from the get-go where they're carbon neutral in the summertime or carbon negative in the wintertime. Well, that makes a huge difference. Do I really need them to be close to me, or can they be, have a little bit more latency? These are all things that you can design from the get-go. We just need to be smart about them, and they help relieve the pressure on the grid and things like that.
Just needs to be the correct pricing, including carbon. Final question, and I'll put links to so people can find you and Qantm AI or advisory business, as well as obviously One Infinity. But One Infinity is a responsible investor in AI. How when we get to that super better than human intelligence, and obviously that's got that skews way. There's lots more in front of that curve than there is behind it. How worried should we be? That's a fair question to ask. And obviously we also live in a world where there's lots of incentives not to be responsible as well. What does the future hold, or is it not worth thinking about right now?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot more pressing problems today because I think we're multiple decades away from superintelligence. But I think we need to start, and we obviously think we need to start thinking about it or concerning ourselves with it today. And so that's why we've launched an AI firm that's focused on responsible AI. And I also think that in order to implement AI in today's world, it's got to be designed responsibly. And if we're doing that today, I think when we start getting to the point where we have AI, AGI, that's AI as smart as humans, it will be built in a way that we're protected from it. And certainly when we get to the place where AI is smarter than humans, we'll be protected against it. And I think there's two sides to this, or we look at it as there's two sides. There's AI, there's technologies that enable responsible AI. So these are technologies that help you measure it, that kind of, are deep tech technologies that, are explainable, transparent, deterministic instead of probabilistic, green, because we also count sustainable as responsible, and sustainable being, environmentally sustainable. And then there's deep tech, because we primarily invest in deep tech, AI technologies that are developed responsibly. And the way we define responsibly is there are some principles that are developed by OECD, which is an economic development, international economic development organization. They're AI principles. So they're OECD principles of AI. And more than 50% of global GDP, countries representing more than 50% of global GDP have signed on to these. And that's how we use those to define responsible AI. And we actually measure ourselves using those, and we tell our companies that come to us to invest, you need to look at these and you need to tell us how you're aligned to them. And so we believe that if we use those, that as we're investing in companies, we're going to support, move towards AI that is developed responsibly, that supports human protection in the future and today. And so that's how we think about it.
Yeah. And on the flip side, of course, we've had UK regulation, US regulation come in. There also is now a regulatory consideration when you're deploying these. But
yeah, you're not going to be able to deploy AI in the future, and even today, right, into financial services and healthcare, you can't deploy AI without considering regulations. And you have the EU AI Act, which goes into effect fully in 2025, or starts to go into effect in 2025 and fully in 2027. And so you're already seeing regulations around the world that are going to require that AI is developed responsibly, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's already having its impact in a year where we have the most democratic elections ever. So, interesting. Well, Seth, you've been so gracious with your time. It's been really fascinating. As I said, I put links so people can find you and your advisory business, because I'm sure there's definitely some listeners here thinking about lots of the points you raised. And I think the key one, obviously, is, as with all these things, right, is what's your strategy and how you're going to achieve it, rather than start with the tool and try and figure out how to wedge it in. That way leads to just rising costs and disappointment, I guess. But it's been lovely to have you on, and hopefully we can have you back on in the future and see where the commodities sector is on its journey and the broader AI sector is.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your audience.
Thank you for listening. To find out more about HC Group, our global offices, and our expertise in search within the commodities sector, please visit www.hccgroup.com. hcgroup.global.